welcome to my party. And it's been a long time coming, so I'm just so grateful for all of you for sharing this moment with me. I know some of you thought it would never come, and that includes me also. But I want to start by thanking you for taking the dialogues, for becoming some of my coaches, for supporting me and my message so much down through the years. And today, what I really wanted to talk to you about was something that's not in the book. So what you're getting is the real stuff here today. It's not the book, you can read it, but this is something that maybe no one knows but you after today. So this is how I wrote the book and what went underneath it and behind it. So I want to start with saying that I wrote the book and I started writing it when I was 5 years old. And it all started with a story. And I've got two of my brothers here, so they're both going to remember that we tell the story occasionally at holidays and things. But I grew up in a church-loving family supported by great parents and just a small little town, and we went to church every time the doors were open. So we were one of those church-going families. And I'm setting this up because I want to tell you that my greatest role model was my Uncle Jack, who was a Methodist minister. Now remember, there were no preachers, no priest, no pope that was a girl. So I had a role model in the church of a lot of men. Well, one Sunday I was leaving church, and my mother tells this story, that we were walking out and I pulled on her sleeve and I said, "Mom, there's a father, there's a son, and there's this ghost part, but where does the girl fit in?" So I swear this is where I started writing this book about the divine being within you. It started here. And it continued. I had a cousin named Hal, and I called him Hal Boy, and he called me Pain. And so we really were both, went into the same line of work and were real close. And we really had a lot of philosophy discussions in our lifetime. And one of our first discussions was when I got to be about 6 or 7. He comes in one Christmas and he tells me, he says, "Payne, I got some bad news." And here we were, two little 6-year-olds talking. And he says, "Payne, Santa Claus is dead." And I mean, it was devastating. But here's how the discussion went after that. I said, "What do you think about the Easter Bunny?" And then we went to the tooth fairy. We held on to the tooth fairy a little bit since we had a lot of teeth. So we didn't knock the tooth fairy out. But my next thought was, I said, "Hal Boy, I don't think there's a God or Jesus either." And we were both just looking at each other. Well, we both kind of got upset. I went running to my mom. And my mom is one of the most brilliant women I've ever known. And so I go in and I say, "Mom, I know Santa Claus is dead. Does that mean God's dead too?" And so she looks at me and she goes, and I think this was such quick thinking on her part. She said, "Honey, maybe God is on the inside of you. Maybe it's when you feel love and when you're a really nice little girl, maybe that's how God is." Now, wasn't that smart of her? She didn't want to give up that part about God, really that she could use to make me grow up to be a great little girl, a great woman. But it's been there for me all these years. Who is God and where is he? Where does he live? And who did Cain and Abel marry anyway? I've always been this questioner. I've always been saying, I don't know, I'm not real sure. Where is God and why won't he show up? Well, the years went on and I grew up and I stayed involved in the church, and I was one of those people that was like my parents, going to church. And as I went through life, I think I bought into it. I think I gradually lost that little girl who was searching for God, and I think she kind of melded into society's view of God. I think what I began to see was that God is a separate man sitting up in the sky, and I don't think I ever got out of that childhood view of God, that he was a man that took care of you. And when you think about Father, you combine God with Father. Well, my father was a very kind, loving man, so I thought God is kind and loving, but I always thought he was kind of watching out And I always felt a little bit creepy by it. You know, what was he watching me and what was going on? So as the years went on, it stayed that way for me until an incident happened that threw me upside down, and it threw my world upside down, and it made me get back to the questioning I had of God. Because I was going through a divorce, and you know how in life sometimes you hit that wall, that tough time in life. In the book, I call it the dark night of the soul. Well, I hit that wall. And being how I had grown up, I decided to seek out a minister for help. And so I sought out a minister, and I walked in thinking, I need to get advice. I need for someone to tell me what to do here. And when I walked in, I really was trusting, and I believed it was more like this was a man of God. Well, when I walked out, I felt very different, because somewhere in between, I had been sexually exploited. I had been really treated, it was a betrayal of God as far as what I felt at that point. And so that was the moment of turn for me. And I tried for years to get over it. I sued the guy, and we went through a lot of legal work, and there were like over 100 other women who had gone through the same thing with the same minister. So I began to see that maybe this was a point in my life when I needed to look at a different place than outward. I was blaming, I was angry, and along the same time I was a therapist. And so at the time I was a therapist, I found that a lot of my patients were not getting any better. I noticed this. What I didn't notice was I wasn't getting any better either. So I began to think maybe I better look within. And so at the time I thought, I need a process, I need something that I can use to find myself, because I really felt like I was losing it. I didn't know who I was. I had lost that little 5-year-old curious child who questioned everything, and I had become what everybody wanted me to become. I had become a pleaser and someone that wanted to do the right thing and wanted to be what everybody wanted them to be. But I'd lost myself. And so I decided I need to find something that will get myself back. And I looked, couldn't find anything, decided I'm going to have to invent something. I'm going to have to invent a process that takes someone from where they are and helps them figure themselves out, helps them become the best person they can. And so I worked on it, and at the time I was working in a psychiatric unit, and I had all this laboratory of mentally ill people to try out these techniques and these ideas on. And through the next 5, 6, even I think it was 9 or 10 years, I worked on this project that you now know as the dialogues. And so I came up with this process, and I began to use it with people, and I found that it had great success. And people began to ask me, can I use that? Professional people wanted to be a part of it. And so I began to realize that it was something really excellent. And as a result of it, I created, as you all know, a coach training school where people can use this methodology. Well, one thing that I noticed as people used this process was that something happened to them about the middle to the end of it, a huge transformation. And many people began to find themselves. But the curious part was, many of them began to find God at the same time. And so here they were looking for themselves, and it wasn't until they found themselves that they also found God. And I began to put the two things together. And I realized as I watched people go through the process that some of the things that happened to people were way beyond human capabilities. I couldn't figure out how they accomplished some of the things that they wanted to and how they transformed. And I began to see and believe that there was something more inside us than just who we think we are. And when we realized it, I could see that people began to grow in ways that were truly godlike and divine. And so I began to see that people were more than they thought they were. I began to see that there's something in every one of us that is divine. And I thought divine intelligence is what we have here, and yet nobody really even thinks of it. And so I thought, okay, I got to write a book on this. Well, you know how you do. You say, I'm going to write a book on something, and the motivation wasn't there. I knew I needed to write it. I knew it was probably going to be my life project, but I kind of put it on hold. I was having a really good life. Dave and I were just traveling and having a lot of fun, and I thought someday I'll write this book. And so someday came at a time that was very odd. It happened in a spiritual experience that I had. Dave and I were traveling in France, and we were staying. We'd had the good fortune of being able to lease a home in southern France for 5 or 6 weeks one summer. It's been 4 or 5 years ago now. And when we were there, we arrived, and Dave loves history, and I love seeing beautiful scenery, so we decided we would travel around and see everything we could while we were there. And so we went to the local travel bureau, and they told us about something called the Cathar Trail. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of it. I had never heard of it at the time. And I found as I talked to people, very few people have ever heard of the Cathars. But the Cathars were a group of Christians that were early, right after Christ was crucified. They had a different view of what Christ was about than the traditional Catholic Church. Well, this was during the Crusades and during religious persecution, so the Catholic Church was much bigger than the small little group of Cathars. And so persecution happened, and the Cathars were massacred and they were killed. So on the Cathar Trail we were on, we went around and saw all of the places where the Cathars lived, and we heard about these people. Well, it was still kind of curious to me, but I didn't think much about it until we got to a place called Montségur. And Montségur is the place where there were over about 250 people, Cathars, that were massacred there. And so when we drove up to see it, it was actually the burial site because they were burned at the stake there. And so when we walked up, we asked the travel guide if she would go up the mountain with us and tell us a little bit about what this place was about. So we walked up the mountain. It was quite a trek. And when we got there, she was telling us all about where they lived and what they did and all of what they believed. And I just asked her, curiously, I said, what did they believe that was so different? And so what she told us was, she said, well, there's not much written down, so most of it is by word of mouth. But what they think they believed was that Christ was divine, and so were we. And they believed that the divine was in. And I looked at her and I said, you mean, and she said, they thought God was on the inside of every one of us. And of course, my mother's voice just came to me then, and I felt this moment that I thought, this is so extraordinary. And so I wandered off by myself to ponder this on the mountain, and Dave followed me, and I was sitting there trying to give myself some space to think through this. And I'll never forget, he walked up, and then when he looked at me, he went, no, okay. So he walked off and gave me my moment. And here's what happened in the moment. I could imagine and hear these people talking. And one of the things that the Cathars believed was that women were equal to men in the church. They had priestess. Isn't that cool? I mean, that was just kind of what was drawing this little 5-year-old girl to these people. But I could hear them talking. I could hear this group of Cathars talking, and pretty soon I could hear them talking to me. And I felt this presence of them there with me on the mountain, and I felt them giving me a message that said, Jayne, we were burned at the stake for this idea. You have the same beliefs and the same ideas that we do. Can't you carry this message forward for us so that we won't have died in vain? And so this is where I got the impetus, the motivation to write this book. Several of you have called me and told me that you love it. Several of you have called and said that you disagree with it. And that's okay. I think I had to write it. I think I had to say what I believe about God. And so, in a way, I think divine intelligence for me helped me write this book. I had to find it within myself before I could write the book. And I think that today, I guess, I'd like to tell you that I think the divine is in you. I think it's in every one of you sitting here today. And I'd like for you to know that I can see it. And I know many of you believe the same thing and can see it also. And I hope that you see the divine in me, because I believe it's in every one of us. And I think we're all equal, and I think that we deserve to know that we're this powerful. When people tell me that they're weak or they can't do things, I just tell them you're lying. It's a lie that you can't do this. You can do anything. Our capabilities are unlimited. One of the things that I added to the book was the neuroscience part of the process, because I wanted to combine science with religion, with spirituality, and make it a book where there was hard cold facts in it about how the brain works, along with some spiritual concepts. So I'm eager for you all to get it and to read it. But I know that you're my audience because you've all been a part of my life for so long. And so today I just want to tell you, thank you so much for being here and for supporting me and for seeing what I have figured out about myself. I guess I have to say I'm pretty proud of myself. And I want to say that that little 5-year-old girl in me, I think, has finally stepped forward. Thank you. Thanks. I have many people to thank. I want to thank the team that is standing in the room that's helped me put this together. I want to thank Amanda, Danielle, Brooke. I want to thank all of the coaches that are here that have helped me write this book, my friends, my family. I appreciate so much all that you've done to support me. And coming here today has meant so much to me. Thank you so much for being here. And I thought now what we do is just come up. I have a book to give each one of you today, and I'll sign it for you. And we'll do that. I do want to tell you about a new project that we have before you leave, though. I'll stick one of these brochures in the book. But what we're doing now is we've had such an interest in the dialogues and the process that I wanted to make it where more people had access to it. So what we've done is we've created a weekend retreat where you can come and take the dialogues in 4 days. Now I know those of you that have taken it are going, really? So it's going to be some weekend, isn't it? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give people a taste of it. And it's going to be a different experience because you're going to be in a group reacting to each other. So come and get a taste of it, or maybe send people that you know that you think might want to take it. And let them learn about the process in a short taste. And so I'll put one of these brochures in your book, and I hope we're going to start in September. And I hope that you can support us in this mission too. So thanks again for being here.